Morning. I'd like to call to order the Metro Council work session of July 25th. Connor, will you please call the roll?
Yes, thank you. Councillor Wong.
Present.
Councillor Nolan.
Present.
Councillor Lewis.
Present.
Councillor Gonzalez.
Present.
Councillor Rosenthal.
Here.
Councillor Simpson.
Present.
And President Peterson.
Present. Thank you. Before we begin our agenda items, can we please play the safety video for our in-person attendees?
Mm-hmm.
Great. Thank you. Councilors, we've got two things on the agenda to talk about today. And I have a hard stop at 12:30 for an expo thing. So I just want to make sure we're rolling along. And we get through the majority of the first one, which is the regional housing funding discussion. And as you'll recall, about 2 weeks ago, we had the COO recommendation. Our Melissa Madrigal, our COO, presented that recommendation. And I want to also take a minute again to thank staff for getting us to that point, because it took several months of very hard work and discussion across the region with stakeholders to get to at least a proposal for us to start working on the next phase, which we talked a little bit about the last time we met, that was a good first phase. And now we need to start drilling down with electeds to electeds and figure out some of the short-term and the medium-term next steps. So we wanted to have this discussion as a council today to follow up on that conversation that we started on July 9th. During that last work session, I indicated to you my intention to provide clarity to the partners by beginning to work immediately on any necessary ordinances or resolutions to implement some of those changes that we have the authority to do without going to the ballot. And I want to make sure that we stay on track, because these changes, I think majority as we go through this, the majority of our elected officials and staff believe that the current system is lacking in several key areas. While we don't always agree on exactly what's lacking, I think that we all agree that the system needs to be changed. I also heard from council that there's general agreement on that short-term versus medium-term end of the year type things we can do versus things we could take to the ballot. So in order to help us have a discussion today, we've got a lot of staff on deck if we want to ask questions about how we got to a recommendation or what were the key assumptions. But my intent with this discussion is get just an idea of where we are sitting as a council on the proposal, and so that when I am talking with the chairs or other stakeholders and getting information ready to come to you for consideration and feedback, I know where I'm starting from. So what we do know is that we all are trying to improve the program to get better outcomes for people experiencing homelessness. And that requires Metro and the counties to work together in partnership, and understanding that we need each other in order to fulfill our promises that we've all made to the voters. As I've had the conversations with the county chairs over the last week, I have come to understand their perspective on this, and I can certainly share a general overview of that with you. But let's start with governance, because there's really two key things that I really want to talk about today. One is the governance issue, which we can provide some direction to staff, hopefully by the end of September, in a resolution form to go and negotiate the details, but some sort of structure of what we hopefully can start working on. So The recommendation spoke specifically to IGA renegotiations. I want to lift this conversation up a little higher than IGA negotiations, because what we need to do is identify areas of agreement, but also a structure. I think we have a proposal for a structure. I'm not sure that it's keyed into where we can actually get agreement. I think that we started to understand everybody's perspective on what that structure could look like. I'm not sure we're totally keyed into it yet. What I've heard from staff is consolidating all their feedback from the SHS audit, as well as my own outreach and discussion. We have a lack of nimbleness right now and inability to swiftly course correct within the program. The current oversight model has overlapping roles and responsibilities, so it's not clear. There are limited enforcement tools to ensure each body is able to effectively fulfill their intended charge. And the current structure, while well-intended, has resulted in prolonged and complex pathways to planning and goal setting. So that's kind of some of the issues that we've heard. The recommendation did address this with trying to establish clearer, more independent oversight of the program. And again, that's just the proposal to create a single independent investment board appointed by the Metro Council and representing subject matter expertise. That subject matter expertise would include lived experience, homeless services, healthcare, behavioral health, substance use disorder and treatment services, affordable housing development, finance, the justice system, data, and performance. Nobody wants to have any input on this, obviously. This investment board would be responsible for making recommendations to the Metro Council regarding program goals, outcomes, affordable housing targets, and data-driven key performance metrics as components of a new regional investment strategy. It would implement a direct feedback channel to the independent oversight body for direct service providers, require Metro to set regional reporting frameworks, monitoring plans, address cities' needs for better support and coordination, and require counties to submit new local implementation plans that conform with the regional investment strategy. It's a lot, and we printed it out. That's what we've heard. And what I've heard from you on our last conversation was topics regarding decisions on governance and accountability should be approached with the urgency that this program demands. There's an interest in a continued discussion with cities about their unique needs and concerns. Council generally supports the recommendation for Metro. And we'll come back to this to set regional reporting framework standards and definitions. There's an interest in exploring the benefits of individual IGAs, and that continued collaboration with our county partners will be critical. Lastly, the changes in the governance and oversight structure should reflect a continued commitment on prioritizing services and housing to POP-A as described in the SHS measure. So let's just stop there and kind of talk through some of the points that were just handed out to you that were in the proposal. What I feel like I need to hear from you is I basically heard from the counties that they would like to be treated as partners. There's a general right now feeling that they're being treated as a contractor. And I say that to basically tell you what I'm hearing and how in their perspective. I think the counties are striving to, obviously working very hard to grow their programs and maybe feel like there's a top down and a bottom up that's not working for them. So that was my first set of conversations with each of the three chairs, is just being able to understand what is holding them back from being able to move forward on getting agreement. So I think trying to find something in all of this that clarifies our role as the regional government and the oversight in the measures, because it's legally in the ballot measure, but also trying to create, I would say, a more collaborative system between the cities and the counties and Metro, which we have experience in, and trying to figure out how to do this independent oversight in a way that doesn't feel like we're telling, and I'm going to quote now, telling the counties how to budget. And that's where they're also having a problem, is that they feel like they are being told by outside bodies on how to budget. Which they clearly would push back on because they do have independent authority to do that. So I'll leave it open, but what am I missing? What am I not hearing? What do I need to know? Don't all jump in too fast. This is not an easy topic, but it's important. We're just gonna be okay with silence. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see you. Were you, oh, yep. Counselor Nolan?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks for the summary as well. I appreciate the outreach you're having with our partners, the counties. I have a different take on what partner means, though. The counties have a lot of experience taking direction from governments that provide them with funding, particularly the federal government and the state funding, who routinely impose expectations of results and in many cases methodology. I tend to agree that methodology is probably not something Metro is in the best position to impose under normal circumstances. But the feedback you can have from me is that Metro currently is the steward of the program funded under the current ballot measure approved by voters. I can't imagine another government referring a reform of that. And we're talking here about what Metro Council might do.
Mm-hmm.
If Metro as a whole is the accountable entity, government level, for the program funds and deliverables, then I think that this council needs to have a definitive role in defining the expectations and looking forward, which I prefer to have a forward-looking perspective on this. We reasonably have to do the backward-looking and auditing and other things to make sure we abided by both state law and voter expectations. But we should be setting more specific goals about the outcomes we think the voters expect if they approve this. If we ask the voters to approve changes, we should be in a position to be able to tell them, these are the changes you'll get. Not just in the wonky stuff that we can spend a lot of time around this table talking about, but in the human beings who move out of rough living. But we're not experts. We've now collected some good experts, and I appreciate that, in housing services delivery. But that is the part that I would look to our county partners to do. We say what needs to get done and how much money is available for it. They go about the business of budgeting to achieve that. And I had said in my earliest opening comment that under normal circumstances, only in cases where a county doesn't meet the deliverables that we require would we intervene, and then only to get them back on track, like we did with Multnomah County and the corrective action. So I do think there's a partnership, but we should play the role that the voters look to us to play, which is setting the expectations and the funding. They should play the role of implementing and making things happen.
Thank you. Councilor Lewis?
Sure, thanks. I would echo many of comments from Counselor Nolan. When I think of partnership versus contractual relationship, in partnership, there's respect. And in partnership, there is mutual beneficiaries. And I think that we've lost sight of that. Maybe not at the elected level, but particularly from my window into the staff level. And the tone of that is set up from the very top. So I think it's on all of us to reaffirm that even at the staff level, we're working towards having success that is mutually beneficial. And this is not going to continue in this county or metro. It's going to be both. And the frameworks need to move forward in partnership. If that's what I think us at the elected level are expecting, that's what needs to happen. 1, 2, 3, 4 levels below. My other kind of texture to this conversation is that while Metro has staffed up and we do have some expertise in-house, there's a lot of expertise in the counties. Up into a point in which they are experts in specific parts of our region. And the thing that Metro can bring to the table is regionalism and the ability for us to add in how every corner of our communities has to be covered and served by this measure, and that there is no barrier of county jurisdictional or city line that gets in the way. That is not something that our municipalities are familiar with. They just go up to the edge and it's a cliff. And we need to be promoting how we do this work so that those lines don't continue to create those divisions.
Good point, thank you. We've had a little bit discussion on this, but let me drill down on how would council like to participate? Both in roles and responsibilities. Is there a format that would feel similar to what's been proposed that you feel comfortable with, or other formats? Yeah, Councilor Lewis.
Clarification, how we would like to participate in this period that we're in right now of deciding what's next, or ongoing in terms of our relationship to the dollars?
In the structure of governance, correct?
Okay,
Yeah,
thank
yeah.
you.
I think the counties are trying to say, this is what we need out of this, is to feel more collaborative and less directive. And to your point, Councilor Nolan, there needs to be some sort of regional system. That's what we're funding, is a regional system. And how do we keep that regional system look while allowing for the counties to do their work and do it well, right? Like, how do we structure ourselves so that we're not caught into this death spiral of reporting, but not ever getting to performance metrics? Yeah, Councilor.
Thanks, President Pearson. Yeah, I when I hear the theme from conversations, like using the word a contract relationship, it elicits feelings that I'm sure many of us have. I'm gonna try and err on the side of the positive of what that means, which to me signals, like folks have mentioned, a desire to redefine partnership. And in that, I think, is an opportunity to, like Councilor Lewis and Councilor Nolan have mentioned, to really recenter the mutual agreements, our shared outcomes, our shared journey, all those things, right? And to your question on governance, to me, what I feel the right place for the council to be is to have a more proactive role in goal setting. And I guess essentially the mechanism that we have now that you just referenced is, we get quarterly reports that are after the fact. Really the touch point that we've had to help really set the goals is around the agreements around the local implementation plans. What I would love to see is an opportunity to move some of that goal setting up front, and not a way that we take over the budgeting or anything like that. That's not a place for Metro to be. And I do want to honor the expertise that the counties bring to the table. But at the same time, this is a regional measure, regional taxpayers, and people want to see the outcomes. And I think we bring a lot of value to that in this partnership with the three counties, and helping us to get to where our system needs to be. And I would love for us to be able to work on that. And I think Marisa's recommendation to us creates a pathway for that. And I do feel like there is a lot of work that we can do without going to the ballot around that. And that will take, negotiation and partnership in good faith. And I'm hopeful that we can all get there as agents and problem solvers in the region. So I'll leave it there for now. And if there's more questions, I'll chime in.
I'm gonna go with Counselor Wong, who hasn't had a chance to speak yet.
Okay, thank you, Madam President. And I think I'm in general agreement with all the colleagues that have, weighed in already. And I just want to be sure that, like this council, as Councilor Gonzalez said, has an ability to help kind of set the table earlier on. And I think it is concerning for me that, there's a perception that we're in a contractor relationship, and I really want us to move towards partnerships. But I think when you're in a true partnership, there's room to have tough conversations. And I don't want us to forget, that part of it, like what a partnership means. We're not here to be, cheerleaders. I mean, we are, but not like at the expense of kind of delivering on what voters want to see. So like, what is the role of like accountability and having a place of trust so we can have some difficult conversations? And I think that's kind of what we're missing. And just over the last couple of years, I think I've wanted to have some of these tough conversations, but it's been, you need to bring those, issues to one of the 6 or 7 bodies that we have now. So it kind of gets like lost in the ether. And that's like, where is that space where in partnership, we can tackle our shared challenges without it being, kind of diverted to one of these other bodies where then it's kind of lost in bureaucracy. So that's really what I'm looking for, is like, where does the rubber meet the road, and where can we have goal setting, shared understanding, and tough conversations?
Awesome, thank you. Counselor Simpson.
Thank you, Madam President. Really want to lift up and echo those sentiments and comments around trust. I'm glad Councilor Wong brought that up. I mean, I think that has been, in my tenure on this council, has been the issue for me, is the accountability, the trust from our partner agencies. And I get it, they have insurmountable issues at the forefront. However, we still have to be accountable to our voters and to our constituents in getting this money to the best use possible, and to those folks that really need it. And, we don't need to go into it. There's a number of issues happening within the Portland, and I won't speak on the other counties, but at least Multnomah and Portland. Like, we've seen the news, we've seen the media reporting on it, and it's like, some of those things are outside of our hands in terms of like the relationships between other partners. And I'm on the same page with everyone. We need to facilitate that conversation, because the more and the longer we are allowed to be in this space, the more people are continuing to live in harm. And that's just not gonna, calculate out for the voters. And so I think I believe Marisa's recommendations, again, open that door for us to have those conversations, but in good faith, folks got to come to the table and build trust.
Thank you. Counselors still on the Metro roll? Okay, go ahead.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I want to really amplify one of Councillor Wong's comments about how we work in partnership and have difficult conversations with partners, anchored in shared objectives and goals. But I also am really mindful that it is this council, as you have said, Madam President, that is obligated by our charter to take a regional view on programs that we engage in. We get involved in things. In fact, the council found before referring this measure that there was a regional interest in housing and equitable access to housing. The 7 of us are the only elected officials who are accountable to the regional voters. Our interest extends to the Metro Service District, which is the largest service district except for the state of Oregon, in Oregon. And local governments, counties, cities within that territory of right are more focused on their local constituency and needs. We haven't in the past, at least since I've been on the council, impaneled committees to do some of the groundwork to bring recommendations back to the council, but this might be an opportunity for something like that. Councillor Wong pointed out the morass of different bodies touching different parts of this program. I think there's value in a body that is accountable to the voters, that brings in, listens to, incorporates expertise from program operators, from lived experience, but that is always tied to an accountability to the voters. So while I like the idea of a body taking big picture stuff into account, I am not interested in a body that would leave the Metro Council's role to be, yeah, okay, that's good enough. I think we have an obligation to be more engaged in this than simply following on after all the hard work's done. And just to put a final point on that, I think because each of us is accountable to voters, our participation adds credibility to the general public, to the process.
Thanks. Councilor Lewis?
Sure. I just kind of want to revisit where currently our council has been able to interact with the program. And that's been in approval of the local implementation plans after they went through their county processes. And then it's in quarterly reports, annual reports, and to date, one corrective action plan. Other than that, the work is being done at the county level with input from our staff. So I would love for us to find a way that we at council hear and elevate some of the work that's being done, both the work that's succeeding and the work that's not living up to our expectations. Because in the current composition of quarterly and annual reports, we're seeing numbers and sometimes we're hearing stories to give texture to those numbers, but we're not at the place of looking at trade-offs. We're not at the place of looking at what's different in different service providing typologies. And that's what the constituents who have asked us to do this work, I think, expect that we know. And those of us on Metro Council have looked at other ways to educate ourselves. We've gone on site visits. We've worked with constituencies. We've gone to business groups who are paying the taxes. We've heard their frustrations. We brought those back. We've walked alongside service providers. We've seen the challenges they have. We brought those back. Where does that happen as a council? That is still lacking.
More good points. Councilor Rosenthal, before I move us on to another topic, did you want to weigh in?
No,
Okay,
not particularly.
okay,
I'm listening.
sounds good. Are there any formats, and you can let me know later, any formats that we already have existing within Metro that could serve as I like the way the council participates in that. That would be helpful too, as we go through this process. Formats of how we do regionalism and how the council participates. So things that you like about those, that would be helpful too, but we don't have to get into that today. Let's move on to this independent, okay.
I actually do have one thought that I want to pursue. Is in representing a more rural district, I don't entirely understand the dynamics of the relationships that go on between Portland, the Joint Housing Authority, the county, and Home Forward. And so that's an area that I understand how the counties work, and I understand that they have their own perspectives. I don't quite understand how we consolidate a perspective on the part of the Portland specific region. And so that is something that remains to me a little bit of both problematic as well as a bit of a mystery. And going forward, since we're going to be changing city government, where do we think, how does that fit in? And that's, I'm not an expert on Portland government.
I guess the way I would hear that is there are unique circumstances in all three counties with their cities and how they do their work, and that we need to be flexible, but still have a regional system. Because we can't all be experts in every single relationship, but yes, I think you are correct. There's complexity within all of that. Yeah.
Just on your last point, I'm just kind of thinking off the cuff, but we do have some great chartered committees here at Metro. So, JPAC, MPACT, CORE, and those are valuable forums for our jurisdictional partners, service districts, general citizens at large to come in and help weigh in. And they actually do take substantive votes that are, often recommendations or, in the bicameral nature of JPAC. And I'm wondering if the independent oversight program might be modeled on some of those to give some more structure in terms of decision-making and representation.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's definitely some pros and cons to each one of them that would provide something to look at. Just thinking about JPAC, there's money that flows through. There's a regional system. Regional goals are set there. However, there's no citizen appointees on it, right? So how do you structure that? But having a policy committee and a technical committee, having a policy, technical, and some sort of audit, some sort of how would you play with the pieces of what we already know works and people are familiar with? Yeah. Councilor Lewis.
Sure, thank you. I do think that bringing up tables that we already have that all have their pluses and minuses is a good part of this exercise. I think Merck is another one because of the interesting relationship of basically independent appointees coming to a table, coalescing, and then working with Metro. I think Metro not having a seat at that table would be problematic to try and duplicate in this context. But I do think that's one place where we have worked through some intricacies of outside appointments to a table. I do like looking at how MPAC works with representatives from multiple kinds of jurisdictions, cities, counties, and special districts, as well as folks there at the table representing community. It's a messier group. I think participation waxes and wanes depending on who's chairing. And I do like how we rotate through chairs there, unlike at JPAC where Metro is always holding the gavel. So I think there's something to learn from all of our bodies.
But in each of those, there is council representation.
Other than at Merck, yes.
Other than Mark, correct, yes, which has been problematic. Yeah.
You have appointed me to serve as council, one of the council liaisons to MPAC, and that relationship is different. We are observers and liaisons. We occasionally, at MPAC, we occasionally participate in the conversation, but the discussion, debate is really among the members. It's very different than JPAC. Since you've asked for something of a perspective on what we prefer, I'll reiterate that I prefer a system that gives voice to the different elements, perspectives, expertise that all touch on the services covered, but that is rooted in or anchored in elected officials. So committee of the council that has membership beyond council members, or if we really want to go for an existing structure, JPAC makes more sense to me than MPAC or the Merck. They're fundamentally different.
Thank you. That was very helpful. Taking that conversation and putting it towards this independent
Investment council.
investment council, thank you. So the proposal there was that it would be all expertise from the community. And they would have, if you go back to the notes, which I'm going to do right now. They would have a lot of responsibility in terms of creating, you guys are gonna have to help me with this, Melissa.
Yeah, happy to
Because there's a lot of words in here and I can't, in a moment.
summarize. Yeah, it's a
summarize
lot.
But overall responsibility as was proposed.
I think what we were envisioning was an investment council advising the Metro councils with the Metro council in the final decision-making role. So, there is a set of questions and decisions that need to be made around regional technical standards or technical definitions, like what is permanent supportive housing and what is just low-income housing. So the idea was that, and it could be, as you were talking about, a technical group versus a policy group, but creating a space to really drill down and be precise about what we're doing, because I think precision is something that has been lacking in the system. But resting the authority for the large, weighty, impactful decisions with the Metro Council. So there's a million variations on that. But I think we heard from stakeholders, if this is helpful, that elected officials in a decision-making role for the quote scary stuff, if you were going to do a big corrective action or if you were going to do a big redistribution of funding or changing the formula, that people felt most comfortable with that and at an elected body level.
Yeah. Okay.
Was that helpful?
Well, so the I think key performance measures were part of that.
Yes, that investment council would make recommendations for a regional plan, key performance indicators. I want to clarify that in staff to staff discussions, we did not request budgeting authority from the counties. So just
No.
want to make that very,
No,
very clear.
But I think there's a clearly roles and responsibility conversation I think the
Absolutely.
counties want to have, because who sets the key performance measures? Who gets to weigh in on that?
How is the input received?
How is the input? And then what does that mean in terms of if they're not, if they're prioritizing certain key performance metrics over other things, does that lead to a corrective action?
Mhm.
Like, I think that there is a perception from their point of view. And the only reason I'm prioritizing them right now is because they are the implementors.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of other stakeholders that I want to also hold up. Those who are funding the measure also would like to weigh in on how they perceive it. And so I don't want to say that that's all we're talking, and that's all I'm going to talk to. I just was able to talk to the chairs and I wanted to hear their perspective first. And so I think having some sort of ability for the experience that you've put in here is certainly helpful. But I think Metro Council, Metro staff, Metro colleagues are used to maybe at that policy level setting key performance, not the actual methodology. That's kind of the technical part of it,
Mhm.
right? But how do we work together to create that atmosphere of building trust? Yeah. So I think that's the struggle that we're having right now, is the perception of the independent investment, because I think it's that investment term, maybe investment board directing the counties. So thoughts on that, Counselor Gonzalez?
Yeah, thanks, President Peterson. And, when I look at the sheet that was handed out to us earlier, bullet point 4C, I think is what we're mostly touching on. I feel like the main theme that is coming across to me and that I fully agree with is one, consolidation of oversight and clarification of roles.
So from 3 to something less than
Yeah,
3.
I mean, ideally to with JPAC in particular, we have JPAC, you have TPAC, and then you have the coordinating committees, and it all kind of flows to a recommendation to the council. Then we have this kind of binary nature of both must approve for it to go forward kind of thing. So there's this shared, that what you're mentioning. I like the idea of that. One of the themes that is present in both MPAC and JPAC is that we have 3 Metro counselors. And so it's, and I bring that up because the broader conversation to me is that the council, we are expressing a desire to be closer to the work. And I think about it more so in terms of like having a hand on the steering wheel instead of being in the fans and watching the car go around the race course, I guess. I was really trying to figure out the right metaphor there. I think that exploring something where the council is closer, we have a deeper representation on that. We're able to work with our county partners on some kind of advisory committee process in which things feed to each other in that way. It makes a lot of sense to me. And I would really support the exploration of that. I right now I'm not in a position to like build that and frame it and whiteboard it. But what I can do is signal to you and to our staff that like bring us some scenarios. Like let's negotiate with our partners what would make sense. And importantly, what existing mechanisms and committees that already exist, maybe at counties and or here at Metro, can we either repurpose slightly or create so that committee that we're able to create that up and down integration there. That to me would be excellent, especially with us to have the ability to to lean in and really define some of these regional items that are still quite fluffy after a few years.
Before I get to Councilor Lewis, thank you. Can you just go through the points from the auditor of things that were pointed out need to be made stronger?
Yes, so from memory, I apologize, Auditor Evans, if I missed anything.
Speaking of it, no.
I think, one of the main things was just a sort of sprawling and ambiguous governance structure. So there's the Tri-County Planning Body, there's the SHS oversight, there's the Metro Council, there's the county commissions. And so in that environment, the roles and responsibilities were not clear. And so things are ambiguous. And with ambiguity comes a lack of accountability. I would say that is like the major point. I think, and again, forgive me, auditor, if I'm misrepresenting this, but I think there are also questions about conflicts of interest on the committees. And so that is something that, we had staff to staff conversations about, addressing. How do we make it really clear if you're receiving funding that, you're either recusing yourself, or maybe we screen for that when we recruit the committees, just so that the public can have, that everybody's role is clear, and that you're not having multiple roles in multiple places that you can benefit.
Thank you. Did you talk about, I'm just going back to an experience I had in another life, having an independent committee that was made up of people with the type of experience that you're talking about that were all out of state?
But they were all out of state? No, we didn't chat about that. Interesting.
So that there would be no conflicts of interest. They would be experts. They would be treated as experts. They could even be paid. And then clear up that portion. Yeah. Just a thought.
That didn't come up. I think we did hear in the stakeholder engagement, because providers and people with lived experience have been very centered in this process and up until this point, and that's not something that we want to lose.
Mhm.
We don't want to lose that perspective. We don't want to disrespect that perspective. But we do want to just clarify roles and responsibilities. And so that perspective can be given freely without, accusations of being in conflict.
Good points. All right. Councilor Lewis and then Councilor Rosenthal.
Sure, yeah, I actually had put my hand up to discuss exactly where this conversation has gone, but
Sorry.
in terms of relying on the word independent, I think it's a word that the public likes and that we would also like to see met. But anybody who has the chops to read these packets and has the commitment to show up time and time again to do this work is going to have in their personal or professional lives been impacted at some point by these services. So I do think it is important to set ourselves up for success, and that we are not just grabbing the average Bob off the street and putting them here, because that's not going to set ourselves up for success. But one thing I do like about looking at both JPAC and MPAC, there are seats at the table for folks from the agencies that we need to be in coordination with clear roles on how they sit there and when and how they vote. For instance, at MPAC, LCDC shows up and then they don't have a voting role because they're actually going to be overseeing some of the decisions that get made. Similarly, ODOT is at the table at JPAC. And I look to our current oversight committee where we have somebody who on their day job is at OHCS and luckily is able to kind of reach into that part of their brain and bring that resource forward. But there is an individual on their own time. So we're not actually getting the benefit of OHCS at the table. We're lucky to have that expertise. So I do think it's something that we really need to dig in on, because we will always want to have practitioners. We will always want to have been advised by people touched by these systems. And we need to do it in a way where every single meeting, we don't have to spend half the meeting discussing who might have a conflict of interest and just figure it out from the start. Thanks.
Counselor Rosenthal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I haven't had a chance to read this in detail, and there's a lot to think about, and I will actually have more comments. But I tend to think, first of all, an investment board of some sort is good, and there may be several boards. There may be a technical board, there may be an actual financial investment board, there may be, who knows, a lived experience board. Exactly how they're going to report and what they're going to report still remain to be determined, but at a level of getting a lot of people involved at the expertise level is important. And then I think that there's probably going to have to be something like a JPACT where Metro has some control over it or stronger influence, and where we get some state input, because what we do is also impacted by and impacts the state, and also some of the federal housing authorities. And then I think in the long run, it's probably going to have to come back to the Metro Council. So I think I see like a three-tiered kind of process, but there may be multiple investment committees that have slightly different charges, because it's a lot to ask one group to deal with all the subject matter that was listed there. So that's sort of where I'm leaning, but I have to think about it more.
Sure. Counselor Wong.
No, thank you, Madam President. Not to belabor a point, but I think maybe we've just been really blessed with some great leadership and chairs at the JPAC table. So Councilor Craddock and Councilor Gonzalez. And, it's just as an alternate for JPAC, I'm always impressed with kind of the general alignment of values that comes out of JPAC. Where, generally, I think people really believe in supporting transit and safety and kind of how we, spread the scarcity of dollars to meet those priorities. And I think that gives me a lot of trust in the JPAC process, especially in the council leadership there. And that is much different than how I assess and view kind of our participation on SHS, where there isn't that one singular body or leadership, especially within Metro, to go to. So something in that model, I think, could work really well. And part of that process is then how do we build that alignment and shared understanding? And that process is probably just as important as, the actual structure of decision making. But, that process of learning and building together, I think, is something that we should really focus on.
Thanks. Just point out that JPAC was actually born out of the Mount Hood Freeway dying and money on the table for the region to spend, which is a very similar circumstance of, it was literally an emergency of how to spend money, and they wanted to make sure that they were setting the table for regional decision-making into the future. So having policy people at the table talking to each other and the technical, I think helps, because I think there are shared values, but there are also differences in how people at the micro level, macro level, see how things play out literally on their own streets, which we're talking about people here, and the differences and conditions may not be different, but the conditions in how those needs get met may be different. And so I think having those policy discussions and having policy participation to grow that trust, again, gets to the trickle down of how everybody is working together. Because if you're working together at the leadership table and you're expecting that, then I think, and otherwise staff are going to protect what they need to protect without any direction, without any difference in direction. So I think that's an interesting concept. Thank you. That's their job, is to protect what has been told of them left. Right? If we're kind of, sorry, Councilor Gonzalez, finish it out, and then we'll move on to the tax threshold.
Okay, yeah, great. No, great history on, that you just shared with the Hunt Freeway. And one, I just want to like really thank the council and for this conversation. I think we're really engaging in like really rigorous debate on ideas and direction. And that's really refreshing and just wonderful to have. So want to thank you on that for setting the table for us. I had a question because I feel like we're getting generally to the sense of alignment. And so I'm being like, okay, I feel like we know what we need. What's the next step? And so I'm wondering, what you feel on that, or maybe you'll get to that after we have the full conversation in terms of, you know, are we anticipating potentially like an elected work group? Or are you anticipating more so continued conversations and exploring what seems possible? I would love to get your sense on that so that we can support.
Yeah, I think August, well, we don't have council meetings. August is now going to be a quiet lay of the land, I think, for me to be able to come back to you with at least what I'm hearing. What I'd like to be able to do, with your permission, is to get to a point where at the beginning of September, we can ask our staff to draw up a resolution that would put some sort of structure, governance structure into place and conversation piece to start negotiating with our stakeholders of what pieces are important, what pieces are missing. And literally, I always push a little too hard, but it would be great by the end of September to have a resolution that would move forward to continue the good movement that we have started. And also show to not just the stakeholders around this table, but to the voters in general, that we are a learning organization and we are going to be consistent in our work to make sure that this is a program that meets the need, right? So I think we need to keep that momentum up, and it might be really hard to get to the end of September, but I think we should try as hard as we possibly can. And then also, I would love to get some thumbs up about that same timeline regarding the tax threshold. So that's our next conversation. But yeah, I would like to take August to get together with everybody and see what the art of the possible is, and then come back to you with, I think, a proposed direction, and then ask staff to draft that up. I think that there's also obviously some conversations we need to have around the ballot measure that we would need to figure out by the end of the year, which would be the next step. But I do feel like we need some success here to start building on the fact that we are trying to fully listen to everybody and take into account that to get to the ballot measure portion.
Yeah, I also like the timeline, so thank you.
Okay. All right, tax threshold. The recommendation that Melissa provided us said that council should consider indexing the SHS personal income tax thresholds to inflation starting in tax year 2024. We do have the authority to lower taxes without going to the ballot, and we could take that up as early as this fall. Just to remind ourselves, the voters enacted a high earner personal income tax, and inflation and rising wages will move more taxpayers past the tax income thresholds. So the purpose of indexing is to ensure that the SHS tax actually remains a high income earner tax rate over time. That's what the intent would be if we were to do that. Would you like that? Would you like some scenarios and to have more information from staff than what that does on the actual income off of that as well, to make sure that we still have a program that can meet its needs? No, you're good. Counselor Rosenthal?
No.
Oh, I thought I saw you shake your head. No, I'm sorry. Counselor Nolan?
Nolan, Madam Chair.
I didn't have my glasses.
I get there too. I'm not particularly interested in making any changes to the program that the voters approved until the voters weigh in on changes. I particularly would not want to put ourselves in a spot where we have exercised our discretion to lower the tax rate and then the voters reject the changes. I think it's a package. So I don't see an urgency in rushing to a change now. I do think that the point though about inflation affecting the buying power of personal income is one that we should pay attention to. And that to be true to the idea that this marginal tax is on higher income earners, there should be some indexing. Since we have staff in the room, I wonder if we might invite a couple of them up to talk about indexing, an idea to index
Here comes Josh.
the threshold.
Josh to the right.
Yeah, that's the staff.
My name.
At a threshold that whose exact number I don't know now because it's been creeping up. Personal earned income is only subject to Social Security taxes up to about 150-some thousand a
I think
year.
it's 168 this year or something like that. But yeah,
That's a lot higher than I thought.
it might be 160-ish, but it's in that range.
It gets indexed. By tagging to that, we don't have to have a separate index, and it's already something that people are aware of. The other advantage I see in that, although the other expert in the room could tell us what impact it would have on receipts, over that threshold, whatever it is, people don't pay taxes on their income for Social Security. So paying 1% of the 7% that they save softens the impact for them. In other words, a person who's making minimum wage, making $32,000 a year, pays a full 7.65% in Social Security taxes on all their earned income. An individual who is fortunate enough to be making $1 million in earned income pays an effective tax rate of about 1% for Social Security. My objective is to keep the progressivity of the tax by making the connection here. So
Yeah, I can jump in if you'd like.
Okay.
I'm Josh Harwood. I'm the Revenue and Analytics Division Director here at Metro in Finance. Councilor Nolan, you're absolutely right. We could index to any inflation rate that is published kind of anywhere to address the big problem of addressing the higher tax. To your point, the FICA tax rates, I did look at them, how they've changed over time briefly. It's about 0.5 percentage point higher annually over the last 20 years. So it is a little bit higher than generalized inflation. And that's to account for productivity gains, essentially, that goes into people's incomes. It's imperfect, but that's how I do it. There's no tax policy reason to do it one way or the other per se, but I hear your point about FICA taxes. That seems perfectly reasonable as a measurement to index to.
So can I just clarify, your first comments were you're not interested in lowering the tax rate until further conversation, but you are interested in the indexing portion that would also have an effect of lowering it for some people. I'm just trying to clarify.
yes, I see two pieces of this. One is the rate
Right.
and one is the income over
Right.
which it is applied.
So
I'm
that-
not interested in changing the rate, certainly not in advance of a vote of the people.
right. Thank you for the
Others may have different
clarification.
opinions.
Okay,
I am open to indexing it,
got it.
and I'm suggesting, I really like the idea of tying it to a number that
Already exists.
earners high income earners are very familiar with the threshold for Social Security tax. They know when their paycheck stops withholding that amount and it's found money. So we have found another use for it. Just a little bit of it.
Just a little bit.
If I might, Madam President,
Yeah.
I think the way to think about the difference between the threshold increases of inflation and the rate increases, is the rate decrease, a rate decrease would hit the exact same population that we currently have in the stream and additional people as they come into the income levels. So it's across the board. Everybody's going to see a percentage, a proportional tax rate reduction, or tax obligation reduction. If we increase the thresholds, that does that same thing, and it eliminates some people's need to file.
Right.
So it does limit the number of people that need to file every year. That's effectively why those things exist in tax policy elsewhere.
Madam Chair, might I ask a question of Brian Kennedy? I know you have a lot of numbers in your head. You probably don't have this one, but can you make a guess of what the net revenue impact would be if we did something like this?
Counselor Nolan, I came up here just to tell you that Josh has the answer to that one also. Josh and his team have done a
Okay.
lot of modeling of this, so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well done, Mr.
Leadership.
Kennedy.
We collect, I'm gonna use very rough numbers for purposes of this discussion, because it's complicated, obviously, but we collect about $200 million in personal income taxes for SHS. If we lower the rate by 0.1%, we would collect 180 million. So it'd be a $20 million increment if we lowered the tax. For every 0.1%, we lower the tax rate. The increment relative to current law would be $20 million, give or take. If we increase the thresholds by some inflationary rate that's say between 3% and 5% over the course of each year, what we'll do is limit our revenue by about $5 to $8 million every year going forward. And it will increase every year because we're going to go on a different path, right? So the thresholds would increase every year rather than the rate dropping once and going forever. So those are the distinctions I would make. And we can talk in more detail about the individual circumstances under which those would apply, but that's the broad strokes about where we would be.
I really like the idea of indexing instead of lowering the rate then.
I should say my goal is not to please Councilor Nolan, although I'm happy I did.
Well, let's talk about goals then.
All right, there we are. I appreciate you being here. Counselor Gonzalez.
That was great. Yeah, to answer the question that you posed, President Peterson, I'm in a place where I want to evaluate scenarios a little bit deeper before I necessarily just pursue one really rigorously. I think the concept that Councilor Nolan proposed is an interesting one that I would want to be able to do like some either cross tabulation or pros and cons against other things that we could do. But I think generally speaking, tying our threshold to some kind of federal standard, I think would help ease a lot of headaches and confusion. I know many of the counselors here, probably all of us, get our emails when people are frustrated about quarterly payments and the confusion about who qualifies when, and if folks feeling like if they were noticed with enough time. And so I want to I need to learn a little bit more about what can we do to address that, also that quarterly payment schedule, and also the different mechanisms that we have to communicate and notify people. I know we have a partnership with the city of Portland on that, so there's another partnership that we lean into there. But it's just top of mind, and I've been getting a lot of emails recently, so I want to make sure that I ask about that. And another thing that I would like to explore, it's been in the back of my mind, is an index in which we essentially the rate that we collect goes up depending on how much you make. I don't know what those numbers would be. So if you make more than $1 million a year, that's the full 1%. But if you're at, I don't know, random number, 500,000, you pay the 0.75 or whatever, an index, I guess you could say, that is connected to that level. I don't know what the impacts would be, but I would want to learn. And I'm trying to, I would also love to learn, how much of our revenue comes from people that make a lot of money versus, those people that are right around the threshold, and, giving folks the opportunity to continue to be prosperous in the region, and for us to try and find a different potential pathway there. I would like to explore that. And if you could bring it in one of the scenarios that you bring to us, I would really appreciate that. And in general, like when I think about indexing and inflation, I know it's been one of the concepts that we've been discussing a lot at this table, especially through the roundtable that Marisa put together. And I think that what I would prefer, if it's possible, is to instead benchmark it to something the state or that the federal government is doing, and we're not creating our own thing that like people have to be tracking and what it's going to be doing differently. So I think some kind of standardization would be great, or more standardization. Want to see scenarios. I'm not in a place right now where I want to like just flat out reduce the rate. But I am open to doing different levels of indexing that helps ease the burden for different folks as we evaluate scenarios. So that's where I am right now. I am looking forward to seeing what the data might show us, and making sure that folks feel like we're on the right path forward. Thanks.
Yeah.
Councilor Gonzalez, that's helpful. There's a lot there. I will draw one big distinction, and that you've talked about the taxes and the information around the taxes and all of those things. And I agree 100%. We need to be on top of all those things. We're working on it. Trust me, we do have some data. We've provided scenarios to the SAT groups. We'll provide that to you too and walk you through those. There's also the customer service end of things, and there's the administration of the kind of the keep the trains moving on time kind of work. That's a little bit different. And so we will work on that. But when we're talking about the tax policies and these kinds of things, I would just like to focus on that for what we're talking about right now. And I would just like to say that I think we actually are in a line with state and federal taxes now. The confusion is a function of the taxes themselves and the geography in which it resides under. So we are relatively unique in the country in terms of income tax on a geography that's different than the state, and the type of income tax that we have too. So there's a lot of details in that. So I would just like to point out that actually one of the solutions might be to move away from some of the connections we have to state and federal income taxes as we go through this conversation. So, and on the administration side, I would say one more thing is that we're moving together with the county there too. The city collects their taxes for preschool for all and their business taxes for their general fund as well. So there's a taxpayer viewpoint that we want to take into account when we're making changes. Lots of taxpayers do pay multiple taxes to the city of Portland. And so to the extent we can decrease that confusion that you mentioned, we're looking at avenues to do that too.
Thanks, Josh. I appreciate that. And I think you addressed the point that I was trying to get to, and demonstrating my lack of knowledge in some things, but happy to have you as a partner here. Thanks.
Great. Councilor Wong.
Yep. Thank you, Madam President. I just Googled the average rent here in Portland, and it's $18.95 for a 2-bedroom and $15.61 for a 1-bedroom. And I think the city of Portland, in their kind of salary study for setting new city commissioner wages, settled around roughly, I think it was like $130. And that's considered a thriving wage, which means, you can pay your rent and expenses and maybe an emergency and be able to save a little bit. And I think there's a distinction there between like high income earner and what is now considered, that thriving wage. And I do want to highlight this letter that myself and our colleagues have received from the Welcome Home Coalition with an impressive, array of partners and service providers and community members. And their recommendation, just to read it, was to move the threshold to who pays to 150,000 for individual filers and 225,000 for joint filers if attached to sunset elimination or lengthy extension. So that's something I'd like for us to consider as well, maybe as you're doing scenario analysis is, I think we're all focused on indexing to inflation, but like, what does that high income level actually mean? That's the intent of kind of the voters back when this was started in formulating in 2019. 125,000 was different in 2019 than in 2024. So I think maybe if we could look at this recommendation as well of like, what does it mean to move the floor as well as necessarily just pegging it to some sort of inflationary index, but what is now a high income and what is a thriving wage and all that?
Councilor Wong, if that's a great question, and Josh, correct me, I think the numbers you quoted earlier were based on that analysis. The welcome home recommendation came from the scenario that staff prepared as part of the stakeholder table process.
Sort of. Councilor Wong, yeah, no, that's basically right. We have that scenario in a memo that we can share with you. And we will, and we can do that today. So we have scenarios on a variety of different scenarios around inflation adjustments. What I will tell you, and since I'm here in front of all of you and I'll take advantage of this situation, what I will tell you is that we will run scenarios and we will run them out in terms of what that means under the current forecast scenarios. What I will tell you is that those forecast scenarios are going to change dramatically over the course of the next 5 years. That's a function, again, of the taxes that exist. And so as you're contemplating policies, as you're contemplating structures, I think to the extent we can have flexibility around those structures and recognizing that these taxes will fluctuate. They do as a function of how they exist. That would be something to consider as we have more conversations about it.
Great. I think we look forward to that memo. I think though that scheduling some time, we have time on the agenda next week for more SHS, correct? With key performance metrics. Maybe we could just go through the memo then and talk about that.
Yeah.
Okay. Councilor Lewis.
Sure, thank you. Josh, I'd like to thank you for all the work that you did for the stakeholder table on this subject. And I would like council to dig in on the actual scenarios. My hope is that we start to talk about the opportunity to do something related to the thresholds in time so that it's not a mad scramble with the tax year. So we either need to do it now or do it as part of the larger package. And there's kind of no gray area because if we're still talking about this in December, we've lost our punch for next year. My other kind of side comment on the operations side, not having to do with this. I do respect that we've made vast improvements with how we're working with City of Portland. However, it's 3 years later and maybe we should go talk to the Department of Revenue again and see if they're ready and willing partners. So you don't have to respond to that.
Can I?
Yes.
At the risk of potentially getting in trouble. Councilor Lewis, to answer your second point first, there have been some discussions. So just know that is a concern that we've had. We recognize the 3-year timeframe too. You may have seen something in the paper that precipitated a little more communication on our end. So I will say that. Should we remind me of your first comment real quick?
Just thanking you for the scenarios
And
and
then-
then to dig in and do it now or it's
Yeah,
not
oh yeah,
happening. 'Cause if we're
that's
doing
what I
this
was
in
gonna
December,
say.
We've lost it.
That's what I was gonna say. The income threshold, so the timing around that. It was recommended 2024. We can do that. We can absolutely do that. That's reasonable. We can also use 24 as a base year to jump off of so that the thresholds change in 25. That administratively, organizationally, that is easier. It's not impossible to advance it faster if we need to, if that's the desire of council and leadership.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that clarification. And I'm not gonna snap to a decision right now, but I do think being clear on that sooner than later. And if we are gonna use 24 as a base year, that's great. But let's broadcast it out and then let's plot our path forward.
So timing wise, I think end of September would that still be feasible to make the changes by the end of September?
I would have to check with partners, Madam President. I think so,
Okay.
but I
if
don't
you
want
could
to, I don't
get
want to fully commit yet without
That'd be
checking.
great. If we could find out next week, that'd be great.
We can do that.
Otherwise, if it moves up the timeline for the ordinance away from the resolution, which I kind of wanted to package together.
Okay,
Okay.
we will find out and get back to you within a week.
Okay, awesome. Anyone else on the tax threshold indexing? Very good discussion. I appreciate it. And thank you both for coming out. Any last comments on this topic before we move on? No? We had talked, Counselor, about potentially having a small break on a long day with too big. I just wanted to, does anybody want to take a break or do we want to start with WPEZ? You want a 5-minute break? So
I'm gonna run the restroom one way or the other.
let's take a 5-minute break and WPEZ can get set up and yeah, we'll be back here at noon.
Okay.
I think there's general agreement.
counselors for about a year. Seems longer than that, but only a year.
It does.
We've been working with Metro staff, local governments, industry partners, and community organizations to develop and refine our priorities for a long-range plan to carry out the goals of the regional waste plan and clarify Metro's role in providing facility-based services. I am going to turn it over. I think we all have been so deep in this. We all understand where we're at, and this is a good clarifying moment, but I'm going to turn it over to Marta
Thank you.
to introduce all the staff and the topic.
Wonderful. Thank you, President Peterson and counselors. My name is Marta McGuire. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Waste Prevention and Environmental Services Director. I have with me here Esty Siegel, a planner in our department, as well as Louis Sandoval, who have been leading this project work. We really appreciate the opportunity to engage with you today, and we're making a big shift from housing into the garbage and recycling system. As President Peterson shared, there has been a lot of work, and today is the culmination of much work and engagement over the last year with our local government partners, with community, and with industry. We have moved from the 4 larger scenarios to a narrowed set of investments to set a path forward for improving our garbage and recycling system. I want to acknowledge and thank council for the challenge to think beyond the status quo while prioritizing waste reduction, affordability, and access. Today's work session provides an opportunity to discuss this narrowed set of investments that reflect council's direction from the May workshop and builds on the input that we have gathered to date through engagements. So if we go to the next slide, this just outlines our discussion for today. Specifically, we are seeking your guidance on a proposed set of investments to carry forward for further engagement and development of the draft plan. As I mentioned, we received good direction from you in the May workshop, where we asked you to share your priorities and policy preferences in 6 key areas. There were areas where council was very much aligned, and then there were other areas that council wanted to see options. So today we're going to present a quick recap of the plan development, review the proposed set of investments, outline the benefits and costs, and conclude with a council discussion to provide direction on this set of investments. So with that, I will hand it over to Esty.
Thanks, Marta, and good morning, counselors. I'm going to do the brief recap in a couple quick slides here, and so we can go to the next one. And just to remind you that this plan will be a 20-year vision to provide a roadmap for future investment. Facility and program investments will focus on reducing waste to landfill, increasing access to facilities, and keeping costs affordable. And the plan will allow us to move forward on priority projects in the near term, while we also look ahead and call out areas that need more study. Next slide. So we're nearing the end of phase 3 here and asking council to decide on a set of investments that meet the goals and values, and that we will further detail in a draft and final plan like Marta just mentioned. Next slide. At the symposium last fall, we presented 4 scenarios for project partners to review and consider. And based on input from the symposium and a follow-up survey, most people told us that they liked the distributed and no-build scenarios, which proposed to build a network of mid-sized facilities and foster private sector partnerships. The estimated cost to implement these scenarios ranged from $280 million to over $800 million. Next slide. We also heard within this information that we shared then was support for specific elements within the scenarios, including support for building facilities that separate commercial from residential customers, providing more places for the public to bring reusable and recyclable items, and support for expansion of the reuse sector. We also heard that we should leverage existing structure, improve safety at our existing facilities, provide stable funding for reuse, and keep costs down. Next slide, please. Most recently, council provided policy direction in 6 areas at the May workshop, and we summarized what we heard in a project update that we sent out to our partners in early July. There were areas where we heard clear consensus and other areas where council had questions and asked for options to further consider. And so today is an opportunity to confirm these areas of agreement and review investment options to be further outlined in a draft plan. So now Luis and I will briefly summarize the direction we received in each policy area from May and how this has led to a proposed set of investments that we're going to discuss today. Next slide. We heard broad support from council to increase Metro's role in providing places for residents and small business to take multiple materials and that it's important to increase accessibility to these places. Next slide, please. So the vision for these depots is to fill gaps that were identified by community members, including providing locations across the region to drop off items for reuse, recycling, household hazardous waste, and self-haul garbage. These facilities would be designed for public customers driving cars and small trucks and apart from commercial haulers. Depots would be designed to separate for material recovery and encourage waste reduction over sending garbage to landfill. Next slide. Staff have developed two options for council to consider in this policy area. This slide shows option A, which Metro is proposing to develop a network of 6 depots, which would include building a depot on the vacant Cornelius site first in Washington County, building a small depot at the RID Deployment Center in Northeast Portland, finding a site for building a new North Portland depot to eventually replace self-haul customers at Metro Central, renovating Metro South into a depot, which means Metro South would eventually stop accepting waste from commercial haulers around the year 2032, and more to come about this later. Finding a new site to site a new Southwest depot in Washington County, and also finding a site for a new East depot in East Multnomah County. The slide also shows modeling estimates for drive times, recovery, and people to be served at these depots as compared to the baseline we have today. Next slide, please. So option B is a pared down version with 3 depots instead of 6. And in this option, Metro would only build new depots at Cornelius, North Portland, and renovate Metro South into a public self-haul only facility. Under this option, you can also see the modeling estimates, drive times, recovery, tons, and people served at these depots as compared to the baseline. Next slide. So this slide shows a conceptual timeline of investments in depots, and it shows both option A at the top and option B below, and the comparison of the estimated costs and access and amount of waste reduction. You can see the timing we recommend for build out of these depots, which is really focused on filling the most pressing gaps in the system first, and then to align and support the policy direction that Metro Council provided in May, and which Luis will continue to describe. Luis.
Thank you, Esty. Good morning, Council President Peterson. Good morning, councilors. As Marta mentioned, my name is Luis Sandoval, for the record. I will switch now to the reuse and repair area. Next slide, please. And in this area, we heard broad support from council in May for Metro to increase funding for reuse and repair, and that this is a huge opportunity for Metro to work with existing reuse organizations in planning new facilities. Next slide, please. The includes a reuse warehouse and reuse mall, which are concepts that you have seen before. Each of these facilities would be comparable in size to Pioneer Courthouse Square in downtown Portland, which is about 40,000 square feet. And the proposed approach would be to develop the reuse warehouse first, followed by the reuse mall. And both of the projects would be developed in partnership with reuse organizations in both the planning and the operation of the facilities. The estimated impact on reuse and costs are shown on the slide. And then you also see a third investment in this area, which is the Sustainable Reuse Funding Program. This work is already in progress with a budget note that council approved earlier this year. The budget note instructed staff to come back to council in November of this year with options for what the longer term Sustainable Reuse Funding Program could look like. Next slide, please. In the organics area, we heard from council that more transfer and processing of organics is needed in the region by both the public and the private sectors, with councilors expressing support for exploring public-private partnerships. Next slide, please. A key component of an effective organics management system is processing and transfer capacity. So to improve this capacity, the proposed approach for organics includes 2 key components. First, Metro would continue to invest in Metro Central as a regional hub for receiving residential and commercial organics from haulers, removing contamination, and then transferring the clean material to the best end markets available. Under this approach, Metro would be converting Metro Central to a facility that exclusively serves commercial haulers by the year 2033. And the proposed investments at Metro Central include the purchase and installation of depackaging equipment to remove contamination. And it also includes building and equipment upgrades to support operating the facility to focus exclusively on haulers for another 2 decades or so. The estimated cost of these investments are shown on the slide. The second component of the proposed approach is over the next few years for Metro to continue to pursue and implement different types of public-private partnerships to develop additional organics hubs throughout the region, especially in areas where we have the greatest gaps. And examples of the types of partnerships that Metro could pursue include applying for grants to invest in equipment jointly with a private facility, or Metro could fund facilities, private facilities to accept organics from haulers. This could look like subsidies per ton of organics received, or grants for equipment installation and facility upgrades. Next slide, please. Next is commercial transfer stations. And in this area, Council expressed support for repurposing over time the 2 Metro commercial transfer stations to focus on providing the services that are more challenging to provide for the private sector, such as self-haul and organics transfer services. Next slide, please. In this area, we have one proposed facility option due to Council's preference to reduce Metro's role in handling waste from commercial haulers. At the same time, converting Metro South to a community drop-off depot would create a service gap for commercial haulers in District 2 in Clackamas County, as well as parts of Portland, Washington County, and other areas that are served by Metro South. One solution presented here in option A is for Metro to seek private facilities interested in serving haulers near Metro South and authorize a new facility without increasing Metro's costs. Unless Metro decides to regulate facility prices in the future, a drawback of this approach would be that Metro would not be exercising control on pricing, materials accepted, or transfer capacity. Alternatively, in option B, Council could explore a public-private partnership to build a small commercial transfer station near Metro South. This would allow Metro more oversight over pricing, the materials that are accepted at that facility, and the transfer capacity that it would add. Though it involves a collaborative investment approach. There is also the option for Council to take a phased approach by pursuing option A first, with a set of defined goals, and then consider option B if needed later on. Next slide, please. In the last 2 areas, wet waste tonnage flow and private facility regulation, we heard general support from Council for reducing Metro's guaranteed minimum wet waste tonnage allocation over time and allowing the private sector to handle more wet waste in the future, based on the excess capacity that exists in the system. Councilors were supportive of reducing wet waste while increasing regulation of private facilities. And then councilors also noted the interconnection between these areas. Next slide, please. For these 2 areas, staff are proposing a set of actions to drive changes in the system and that council would review, including options to modify or eliminate the wet waste tonnage allocations program, studying options for lowering or removing Metro's wet waste tonnage guarantee and what this would mean for the system, for customers, and for Metro's finances. And it would also include looking at options to modify, add, or remove private facility regulations to best serve the public interest. Next slide, please. This slide shows a map of all the proposed investments so you can see all the pieces put together. This map shows all the 6 community depots, but we are discussing options with you today. And to be sure, not all of the investments shown on the map are facilities that Metro would build, but it also shows other types of investments such as the reuse funding program and the organics public-private partnerships. It is also worth noting that for investments that don't involve properties that Metro already owns, staff have not looked at the exact location or the area where the investments could be made. Next slide, please. The proposed investments align with council priorities of increased access, waste reduction, and keeping costs affordable, as summarized here, including increased access for the public, more waste recovered, addressing service gaps, public-private partnerships. Estimating the environmental benefits of the proposed investments is challenging, but they are expected to save millions annually. Just composting more materials at Metro facilities, for example, could prevent over $700,000 in annual climate change damages based on conservative assumptions. Next slide. This slide summarizes the total cost estimated by the project's consultant for the 4 areas. If you may recall, the original scenarios range from $280 million to more than $800 million. The package we're proposing is between $200 and $300 million. Next slide, please. Any facility investments that council approves would be developed over the next 2 decades or so, and they would be financed through revenue bonds with 20-year repayment periods. The impact of the proposed investments we have shown you today would be to, over time, indirectly add between $1.50 and $2 to the average single-family garbage collection bill by the year 2045. The regional system fee would also increase gradually over time as facilities are built. And on average, it would increase by 1.5% to 2.5% per year more than the baseline. The proposed investments prioritize expanding reuse, recycling, and household hazardous waste for self-haul customers and organic services for haulers. This focus is expected to impact the regional system fee more significantly than the mixed garbage tonnage fee at Metro facilities, aligning with council direction. And now I will turn it back to Marta.
Thank you, Luis. You can go to the next slide. This concludes our presentation and moves us into council discussion. We have 3 key questions that are outlined here to provide us direction for moving forward. And we do have additional slides, if helpful, for each question to refer back to the material so we could go through question by question or how President Peterson would like to proceed. So I will turn it back to you.
Thank you. Well, I think this is very responsive to the conversations you had with stakeholders in the council. So thank you. I appreciate that. Just because I'm leaving early, if I can just ask the first question. Okay. I think we talked a little bit about this earlier. What was, if we were to do full build out as proposed by the facility plan that or the waste management plan that we adopted like 2 weeks into a bunch of us being on the council. The full build out of that was hundreds of millions of dollars, right?
We didn't have an exact cost estimate for the regional waste plan. The scenarios that we developed gave us a sense of the different ways that could be operationalized. And as we shared, it was up to 800 million in the original full.
And now this is under a couple $100 million.
It is
200 to 300 million with the most expensive options, or
so significantly less.
Significantly less, which meets a lot of the concerns we were hearing from our cities, and so I think that's awesome. I think it's practical, right? I think this is an extremely practical option, a set of options you've given us. Can we as we go along in the decision making, can we just compare it to what was originally thought and how we're phasing things in? And that, I think that would be helpful to see what the
Absolutely.
bill would have been to the average homeowner or taxpayer based on the 800 million
Mhm,
versus this.
mhm,
And what benefits they're gaining
Mhm.
from this decrease and what services would be privatized.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah, and if you recall, the most expensive scenario back in September was the full service scenario, which was it was about $4.10 to the average monthly bill by the year 2045. And that was a whole different approach because it proposed full service transfer stations, more than the two existing ones. But we heard strong support for not building full service transfer stations, separating the two, and paring down the commercial side of things for Metro, right? So for Metro's role to focus on the other services. So that explains one of the large, I mean, the bulk
And
of the
it
change.
reflects what you're saying.
Yeah.
The proposed investment package before you reflects increased public-private partnership, which also allows a reduction in cost.
awesome. I just think that that's significant. And it's meeting more of our goals. So I just really appreciate that. Counselors? Happy. Lots of thumbs up, Counselor Lewis.
Sure, thank you. I'd like to thank you for the work that's gone into this. And I do think that it's important to recognize that it's a step forward for a lot of the different values that we hold. My strong preference would be for scenario A. I think if we're gonna make this drastic of a pivot, it doesn't make any sense to just have 3 depots. 6 kind of feels right. We have 6 districts. There's way better service if we start with 6 than if we start with 3. And I do expect that we'll learn things over time. We don't have to do them all at once, but maybe we end up with 7 or 8 or 5, but we should be shooting for something in the 6 department and not something in the 3 department. I guess my other thought is around how we make investments at our current sites. Because I do think that there's a lot that we need to do to take care of our facilities. And, we were able to see on the ground what a difference depackager could make at Central. And I don't want us to shy away from investments like that, even while we're contemplating a future in which there is more private side work on organics. I do want us to move forward on making our site a good organics hub. And then when it comes to South, I think we can have continued conversations on this because we've wanted for a long time to find a second site, and a lot of this is kind of predicated on us being able to find a site to locate commercial too. So I think that's a large conversation that needs to move from just the plan for it into what's available. And super supportive generally of us figuring out what commercial could look like down there so that we don't remove commercial from that section of the region. Does not make any sense to have to drive halfway across the region to find a transfer station when there's already one right there. And I guess broadly, the movement away from wet tonnage allocation as the main driver of how we balance the books, I'm okay with. But I do think we need to do it in phases, and we need to do it with additional revenue sources implemented first and not as we reduce tonnage. Because otherwise we're gonna have some years where we fall short.
Thank you. And so if I can, and just restate to make sure that we're understanding correctly. So support for the 6 depots, investment for organics, I believe investment for reuse as well, that you are supportive of that approach, as well as continued investment in organics for the commercial waste. We between, and we do have slides if it's helpful to refer back to, for commercial waste, Is there a preference for option A, authorize a new facility, or the public-private partnership? I kind of heard a phased approach, in what you just shared. Would that be reflective?
Yeah, I think a phased approach.
Thank you. And then overall, the proposed investment package, is that something that we would get a thumbs up for?
I think so, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilor Rosenthal.
Thank you, Deputy Chair. I would generally concur with what Councilor Lewis has said. I strongly support the 6 reuse or recycle facilities. And I noticed in the data that it's a good proportionate increase. In other words, it's about a 50% increase in cost, a 50% increase in service, and a 50% increase in tonnage reduction. So it's not, but it's a cost-effective kind of thing. If we're going to do one, we might as well do the other, because if we can at all afford it, we should do it. More people, and it doesn't include the lower, I think your calculations don't include the lower driving time and energy savings from individuals. So better service for individuals is a good thing. Regarding the warehouse and stuff, I support that as well. South is, I'll just comment on North. I mean, I think obviously we need to invest in the packaging equipment if we're going to do more organic waste, because we just really haven't gotten there yet until we develop something like, bins that are compostable, but we haven't gotten there yet. I never quite understand why Central is called Central and not North, because it's not very central, but that's, I guess that's a historical thing. To me, it's as far north, I mean, it's hard to get further north, frankly. But anyway, south remains an issue, and how I would lean in, I would sort of support the phased approach on the wet waste. It depends a little bit on sort of what we do with south. We've learned that south really we should not be doing self-haul and hazardous waste and commercial waste at this one facility. So whether it should convert to a metro run wet waste facility, or whether it should convert to a local self-haul, I sort of lean in that direction. But there's a lot of variables, including, as you know, we went through a lot of time trying to look for a site and found very few qualified sites in the area. So it may have to be a phased approach. We may find something that's suitable, that we think is suitable for a small scale facility. And we may not get somebody who wants to bid on it or wants to develop it for a commercial facility for various reasons. So I think we have to pursue that, and keep south as probably, it's probably going to be a recycling depot in the long run.
Thank you, Councilor
I think for me, just overall, I'm supportive of a 6 depot option. I do have some questions around kind of like in the financial model. Does that incorporate any potential state dollars from, conversation, was it last week or earlier this week?
Yes, it does not, the modeling does not incorporate any potential state dollars or federal dollars. We're conservative in our estimates, so this is the maximum cost. As you know, we are seeking grant funding for investment in organics, so there is the opportunity that these costs will be lower if we're successful with those proposals.
Is there an additional option for increasing service levels? Should we be more successful in securing state, or, is there an opportunity to grow coverage?
To offset the cost of, or grow the number of depots, or?
Yeah, is it possible to add depots depending on how things shake out over the next year or two?
Yeah, absolutely. As you know, this is a 20-year plan and vision, and so it would be phased in over time. I think consistent with Councilor Lewis said, starting with 6 depots, but potentially we go through that implementation, there will always be the opportunity for council to direct additional investments.
And that's in the plan now. So it's like there's a range of depots, but we're going to start with 6, but depending on
that,
circumstance.
That's what we would propose. That's what we're proposing to put in the plan. Where do you want us to start with that proposal, at 6 depots or at 3, as we kind of narrow that set of options?
But if we want to have 9, for
You-
example,
You could do that.
but
That's not
starting
modeled, but.
I think it might be interesting to, if it's possible to model them, because it's, you might have 2 in one district depending on need, but
We
depending
could look
on-
at we could look at cost estimates of what it would be to provide an additional depot, I would imagine.
Yes, and if it is definitely possible as plan implementation, happens over 2 decades. And especially because we have no sites for 3 of those, 4, three of those depots. And there are parts of the region in which if we just had, opportunity to site anywhere where it would make the most effective depot would capture large amounts, it would reduce drive times for many customers. But since we don't know that for those depots, then there's an opportunity that if we only find land available in the second best or third best option for one of those 3 depots, then it opens up the possibility that an additional depot would make a lot of have a lot of impact. But then if we cite the 6 depots in the most ideal locations for 6 depots, council may see that there is no benefit. I feel like Council Rosenthal's cost effectiveness assessment on the fly is can be done over the next 2 decades with as you implement facilities. And since we will be bringing proposed for each of these projects, it's not like this is the last time you will see them. For each of these facility projects, we would bring a plan for that specific facility project for you to review and comment on.
So this is, again, really a vision plan for what we're working towards, and things can ebb and flow as time goes on, and we pilot a few depots and see how successful they are. And if we want to do more, it would be a conversation back with council.
Yeah, I think we just want to be as, ambitious as possible, in terms of, diverting waste.
Yeah.
So I think maybe having some different ranges and possibilities over time to think about.
Okay.
So that if we build one depot, we're not foreclosing opportunities in the future. I also have some questions on the transfer facility with the potential private model or the public-private model. And is there substantial appetite in the private sector for running another commercial waste facility? Like, my understanding was existing facilities already have excess tonnage capacity. So, I mean, would we even have interest in a new private commercial facility?
I think there would be interest. You're correct in that we have excess transfer system capacity in the region currently, but they're not geographically placed where they necessarily need to be. So the discussion around if Metro South transitions into solely a community depot, it would leave a gap on that side. And so commercial waste, through the industry interviews and engagement that we've done, that is the area where they are most interested in engaging in providing services versus services around organics and community depots, if that makes sense.
And what would a process for selecting a private partner look like? I'm thinking about I saw the trade-offs were, no expense for Metro, but the drawback potential would be higher prices. But would there be, opportunities to offset that through a community benefit agreement, or just so we're seeing the totality of potential benefits that a private partner might have versus a public-private one?
Metro Council, as the solid waste authority, has a lot of different levers that you're able to utilize. Under the options that were proposed for commercial waste was the status quo. So just opening it up for a private party to come and apply for a transfer station. If you were not to utilize any levers, that's where a potential drawback could be higher costs or different services provided. The option B, the public-private partnership, that's where you could kind of look at a negotiation of what services should be provided if Metro is an investing partner. So there's a multitude of pathways that you could take for a public-private partnership.
And then the private process, like, would just be primarily cost, or like what would some potential criteria that you might have for kind of selecting a who wins a private opportunity?
If we were going to do a public-private partnership, again, I think it could take a number of different forms. So I think that would be a conversation with council as to what criteria you would want to articulate for what type of partner you would want to take on that responsibility. So there could be preferences in terms of criteria, in terms of roles. I think there's a different range of options.
Yes, and we have been discussing some of what that could look like with the projects consultant a little bit, because there's such a wide range of types of public-private partnerships out there. So you could, Metro could decide to have a very, very narrow, very specific type of public partnership in mind, and issue a request for proposals and say, Metro is looking for a partner to do this, and that, right? It could also be that Metro is trying to be more, open to the private sector being able to propose different options. So you could issue a request for interest to provide commercial services in this part of the region. What would you need to be able to do that? And then you put it more on the private sector to propose the type of public-private partnerships that they would most benefit from. So it could be an existing company in the region that wants to build a facility there, or it could be someone who already owns property in that part of the region and wants to build a facility and just requires maybe some investment from Metro on, as a partner to build that facility. So there's that multitude of options. And so I feel like if Metro takes a phased approach, especially because the other two areas, the policy and regulatory areas, also are, we're proposing that council has more discussion around those areas. You could pair the conversation, not pair the conversation, but they talk to each other. So because we're talking about commercial transfer stations, right? So depending on what you decide to do on the regulatory approach, on the Metro's minimum wet waste tonnage allocation, it might make sense to have a broader public-private partnership, or a very specific type of public-private partnership, or simply to issue a request for interest in any facilities that want to apply under the current regulatory approach for a license to provide services in that part of the region.
Okay, so just,
Hopefully that was more confusing.
yeah, in summary from my input, I like the 6 depots with planning for future expansion. If that were feasible or possible later on. And I think on your question around the commercial waste transfer, I don't think I have a good sense of the trade-offs for benefits to fully be able to pick one path. And I think maybe we should start with some value setting of like, what do we hope to accomplish with this new transfer station? And that might lead to, being able to better decide which pathway to go. Cause I could see potential benefits and drawbacks for all of them, but it's hard to assess, what path we should go until we clearly kind of articulate the outcomes that we want to see on that. So maybe we could have a future discussion on that.
Okay, thank you.
I'll go with Councilor Nolan and then Rosenbaum.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thanks for the briefing that we had earlier so that I could come to this meeting prepared, have a little chance to think about it. I have, and I am as enthusiastic as I was during our briefing. I think this is really well considered. I would like to consider, if our expert is still in the room, 6 depots over 20 years seems very timid to me, especially if this has the opportunity to play a significant role in the goal I've been talking about and we've generally been supportive of turning the corner and reducing waste to landfill. So, Mr. Kennedy, I want to ask you to opine about the feasibility of issuing, if we're funding the capital construction with revenue bonds, the feasibility of selling all the bonds in order to build all 6 depots immediately. And then if they're gangbusters effective, we could move more aggressively later because they've helped reduce solid waste. But the question to you is feasibility of selling all the bonds immediately and building all 6 of them as quickly as we can instead of waiting until, God, 2040 something.
Councilor Nolan, that is an excellent question. Certainly from a kind of a pragmatic perspective, yes, we could absolutely sell, $200 million in bonds. I mean, not tomorrow, but we could do it in a couple months. There are a lot of detailed questions around the type of financing we use. For example, if we use tax exempt financing, which these would likely qualify for, there are restrictions around, you have to have a reasonable expectation that you can spend 85% of the bond proceeds within 3 years. So depending. I'll just say, I have some skepticism about the ability of really any government to move those sorts of projects on that timeline. So I think it's always a trade-off. With adequate
It's your
planning.
job to raise cautions.
Right.
Thank you.
With
I
adequate
appreciate that.
planning, yeah, I think we could do that, but that's probably not selling bonds quickly. That is probably a couple of years down the road where we have identified sites and we're ready to put shovels in the ground.
Right.
The other.
So if we do the advance work before we sell the bonds, the feasibility of deploying them all 85% within 3 years is enhanced.
Yeah,
And that makes sense anyway.
so we always approach bond sales with, it's a trade-off for the fewer issuances you do, you are lowering your transaction costs.
Exactly.
You're also looking at the current interest rate environment. I might not want to sell $200 million in bonds today.
Get you on that.
Pushing it out it's a little bit of a gamble. So I think my recommendation, what I told Marta yesterday when we were talking about this, is when we have clear direction from council on a plan, then we start working on putting together a financing strategy that makes the most sense and gets us closest to delivering the outcomes that council wants to see.
Thank you. That's really helpful information. I would encourage us all to think boldly. I think we should be really aggressively going after a reduction in garbage to landfill tonnage and bringing it back, peaking out and bringing it down. And incremental or timid responses, I don't think it will be adequate for the moment. So yes, good caution on financing, but I would encourage us to move rapidly to implement something we decide we support.
Councilor Rosenthal.
I would concur that there's ways to move quickly. Of course, we have the Cornelius site and we can move quickly on that. And then one of my questions is the Agilent site redeveloped or is it still potentially available? I mean, probably the biggest thing is this cart and horse thing. We have to go out there and look for sites, and you don't want to telegraph too much in advance that you're going to be putting a bond to buy sites because that raises the price perhaps. So there's some work that has to be done that takes time and effort to do. But to the extent that we can, if we approve this policy and we seem to be in concurrence, if we can move more quickly and look at places like, like the Agilent site is a nice location. It was a great location because it's centrally located in Beaverton. Anyway, I would encourage us to look at and see if we can find an inventory of sites that meet these criteria. We have 2 of them already. We have the Red Patrol site. We have the Cornelius site, which we can move on virtually instantaneously. Well, relatively speaking.
I just want to acknowledge, we really appreciate that urgency. With council's direction, you're giving us the path, the blueprint for where we need to go. And we certainly can work in urgency to meet, council priorities. What we haven't had previously is that path of what council envisions for the future. And so this will really give us the direction that we need to deliver on council priorities.
Councilor Lewis.
Sure, thank you. I guess in my mind, there's the work that's done to sites we already control. And then there's kind of the greenfield exploration of what additional sites we could add to the portfolio. And those are two different channels. And I would like to figure out what you need in the upcoming budget in order to make the 4 of the 6 happen. And then the other 2, I understand there's so many outside factors. But I guess kind of granted, we're now barely a quorum. But I think you're hearing loud that we've been waiting for this moment in which we could say depots everywhere. Because, oh my God, I think I've said it for like a year now. And I guess we have to go through a planning process because we're a planning agency, but let's just do it. And I don't know if the December budget bump is too soon, but at least next budget, like if this operation on the 4 sites we have doesn't begin, I think we will be frustrated.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay.
What she said.
Yes, that's what it ended.
So if I could just summarize, what I'm hearing is that council is supportive of the investment proposal that you have in front of you, and that we will be moving this forward for stakeholder engagement. We will also look at an expedited timeline and look ahead to budget implications to allow us to move quickly once the plan is approved on these items.
Yes.
Okay, thank you for your time today. And thank you for staying longer.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank
you. All right, we'll move on to COO communications.
Thank
Any
you.
updates for us?
So for today's COO Communications, I have an exciting update to pass along from our Parks and Nature team. Metro's Nature Neighborhoods Community Choice Grants Program has been awarded an International Association for Public Participation Core Values Award for Respect for Diversity, Inclusion, and Culture. And we'll be receiving the award, and the International Association, the acronym is IAP2, at the IAP2 North American Conference in Ottawa this October. We'll be making official media announcements after the award ceremony, but I couldn't wait to share the news with all of you. The International Association of Public Participation is an organization that champions public participation initiatives and programs around the world. They have popularized the public participation spectrum widely used by Metro and around the world to assess level and depth of public engagement and participation. For those not familiar with the program, the Nature Neighborhoods Community Choice Grants utilize a novel participatory approach that defers decision-making power to community members to propose, develop, and choose which projects to recommend for funding in their communities that benefit historically marginalized communities, protect and improve water quality and fish and wildlife habitat, support climate resilience, and increase people's experience of nature at a community scale. The Nature and Neighborhoods Community Choice Grants process began in the spring of 2023 with a call from Metro for community members to share park and conservation ideas. More than 118 ideas were submitted online and at community events across Washington County. Through 2 rounds of voting, community members cast over 2,000 eligible votes to identify 15 priority projects. The Metro Council approved this final package of projects totaling $2.3 million on February 22nd, 2024, and the funded projects now move to their respective home agencies. The Community Choice team, comprised of Metro staff, community members, park provider staff, and consultants, is so excited and grateful to have won this award. It's a true testament to all the incredible work done by so many folks to produce a program so invested in reflecting the needs, interests, and desires of communities so often overlooked and underserved. But none of that would be possible without Council's leadership in championing this participatory process through the bond development and implementation and without the support of the voters for the bond measure. So thank you. That's my update for today.
Great. Congratulations to the staff and
Yeah.
And to
Good
you
team.
all, thank you for
Yes.
championing it.
any other.
That's
Okay, great. Let's move on to Councilor Communications. I see Councilor Nolan.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Maybe I don't need to make this communication because 3 of the 4 of us here were at the meeting I want to mention, which is the impact meeting. The main item on that agenda that, from my perspective, was a deliberation among members. Well, first of all, testimony from members of the public about the urban growth report and specifically about the request from Sherwood for an expansion. There were some people from the public testifying in support, a member of their city council and I think one other person. And then there were people mostly associated with the agricultural community or alliance there who had concerns and objections because of the encroachment that this would mean onto working farmland. And then the impact committee members had questions and discussion, good discussion, I thought, good perspectives, raising concerns about the proposal, identifying some benefits of the proposal. I think the kind of discussion that we would like to see in that setting. Their schedule has 2 more meetings on that topic itself, 2 both in September, and they will be then making their recommendation to us at their 2nd meeting in September. But it's a lively topic.
Councilor Lewis.
Sure, thank you, colleagues. I just wanted to take a moment to highlight the work that was done by the zoo team to host the AZA board before their board meeting at the zoo on Monday. And the zoo was able to accommodate the board members for a behind the scenes tour, a lunch with some of our executive team leaders, as well as a panel highlighting the work of the bond. Which I was able to participate in. But remember, AZA is our accrediting body, and to have them in a social environment on our zoo campus, particularly talking about the future of our zoo, was really, really good and productive. We also were able to thank the AZA director, who, as you may remember, helped kind of speak to the values of the zoos as they're going into the 21st century. Second, I was at the Oregon City Business Alliance on Tuesday, missed most of council meeting, but was able to interact with Oregon City folks, both on the COO recommendations for SHS and on the UGB and the urban growth report. Really good positive conversations, well received in that room. Thank you.
Okay, did you,
I just want to add just a little bit to what Councilor Nolan said. So far, there has been no expression of opposition among the impact members to the Sherwood request. And the county, Washington County has expressed direct support. So there's there's a local there's some local opposition from the agricultural wineries. One of the big things which makes this different from others is the impact on industrial lands, because they have a couple parcels that could be 50 or more acres, at least one parcel, 50 or more acres, which the state investment board has said that we need in this area. So that seems to be in particular interest to people.
okay, well, seeing no further discussion, the council work session is adjourned and our next regular meeting is scheduled for Tuesday, July 30th, 2024 at 10:30 a.m.